confinement.
And Mr. Holden, you may open on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here to present Assembly Bill 280, the Mandela Act on Solitary Confinement. This is a California Legislative Black Caucus priority bill. Years of research continue to confirm that solitary confinement causes deep psychological and physical harm, but it remains common in jails, prisons, and detention facilities across California. AB 280, the California Mandela Act, defines what constitutes solitary confinement and sets much-needed limits on its use based on standards recognized by the United Nations and modern scientific consensus. The Mandela Act includes a 15-day limit on the use of solitary confinement based on the United Nations Mandela rules, recognizing that prolonged solitary confinement is akin to torture. This bill also prohibits the use of solitary confinement on vulnerable populations such as pregnant women and those with serious mental and physical disabilities, because people who need specialized care should not be locked up in a room the size of a king-size mattress without the access to the services that they need. Prior to 2015, thousands of incarcerated individuals were routinely warehoused in cramped, windowless cells for nearly 24 hours a day and often for years on end. Pelican Bay State Prison alone held over 500 individuals in solitary cells for over a decade. A class action lawsuit filed on behalf of incarcerated people led to the Ashker Agreement and reduced the amount of people subjected to prolonged solitary confinement from over 10,000 to under 4,000 people today, but without any spike in violence in California prisons. I want to take a moment to be very clear on what the California Mandela Act does and what it does not do. This bill does not set a defined limit on how long an individual can be subjected to prolonged isolation without human contact and confined inside of a cell. AB 280 does not eliminate the ability of a facility to hold someone in an individual cell either because they need protection or because they may pose a threat to others. And finally, this bill provides distinct alternatives to a 23-hour lockdown, which only serves to perpetuate cycles of violence and cruelty. Reforming solitary confinement in California is long overdue, and the Mandela Act brings our state in line with others like New York, Colorado, Connecticut, as well as the international community on the issue. I'm continuing to work with the administration and CDCR and propose changes to solitary confinement practices and appreciate their dedication to this issue. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. And Assemblymember Weber, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise in support and as a co-author of AB 280. Last April, when I joined Assemblymember Holden on a tour of New Folsom's prison solitary units, I was shocked to learn that although the individuals confined to these units should have been receiving 10 hours of mental health care per week, they usually only received 1 or 2 hours. Neurologists have discovered that social isolation and sensory deprivation individuals are exposed to when in solitary confinement can cause damage to the brain, parts of the brain that are important for memory, spatial orientation, and emotional regulation. The lasting impacts of damage to these areas of the brain can lead to memory loss, depression, cognitive decline, and disruption in the body's natural circadian rhythms. All of these effects can stay with an individual long after they have left solitary confinement. Restricting these individuals' access to mental health care can also cause physical health complications. Studies have shown that nearly a third of individuals in solitary confinement are more likely to have heart attacks and strokes. I applaud Assemblymember Holden for reintroducing this bill, which will end the use of solitary confinement for specific populations, including those with disabilities, pregnant people, and others, as well as setting limits to how this can be used. I also want to remind people that this bill is the Black Caucus priority, and I thank you, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote on AB 280.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. And Assemblymember O'Brien, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I rise in strong support as a joint author of AB 280. Similar to my colleague from San Diego, I also toured New Folsom with my colleague from Pasadena, and what we saw were abhorrent conditions. This is from a UN standard, aptly named after Nelson Mandela. I think about Alfred Woodfox, who served over 40 years in solitary in Angola, only to be exonerated and freed and suffer from mental trauma the rest of his life. I think of Khalif Browder, who was never convicted of any wrongdoing and was in solitary for 3 years in Rikers Island, who came home and took his own life because of the demons and the trauma. We don't send people into our criminal legal system to be tortured. We send them there for accountability. We send them there for justice. We send them there for a number of reasons. We don't send them there to be tortured. This is a reasonable measure. The author has taken many years to get this right. As was mentioned earlier, this is a Black Caucus priority bill, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. And Assemblymember Calra, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. As a proud joint author, I rise in support of AB 280. For years now, the international community and advocates have recognized solitary confinement as one of the most severe and harmful practices in detention facilities today, going as far as labeling it inhumane and torture. California has made great strides towards rehabilitation and criminal justice reform, but all that work is jeopardized if we're unable to address the inhumane treatment of people detained in jails, prisons, and private detention facilities. Numerous studies and cases have shown the ill impact solitary confinement can have on a person's rehabilitation as well as their physical and mental health. I've personally represented many formerly incarcerated individuals who many years after their experience of solitary confinement are still dealing with the mental health trauma and even fallen into substance abuse and other mental health issues based upon the trauma that they went through while incarcerated and while they experienced solitary confinement. Our policies should be driven by our values: equality, compassion, and common humanity. It is far past time we call out solitary confinement for what it is, torture, and set limits to its use. Respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Calra. And Assemblywoman Bauer-Keane, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of AB 280. I represented a man on death row. He was there for 10 years for a crime he didn't commit. I got to be there the day that he was freed. During the decade he spent on death row, he was in isolation every single day. I was the only person he had contact with who treated him like a human. And I got to witness what that did to him over the 3 years that I had the privilege of representing him. And there is no question in my mind that it was torture. And for any one of us who's seen that firsthand, this is an easy bill. This isn't even hard. This isn't a question of whether folks should be incarcerated or not. It's whether they should be treated in a way that doesn't involve torture, which is a basic human right and a fundamental principle of our great nation. And like I said, I was there when he got out, and he died a month later. He died of suspicious circumstances, but most of us that knew him believe he committed suicide. That's what it did to him. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Bauer-Keane. And seeing no other members wishing to speak on this bill, Mr. Holden, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just also thank my colleagues who have spoken on this very important measure. I think it's very easy sometimes to live life and not pay attention to circumstances that others find themselves in. And clearly, those who are incarcerated are there for a variety of reasons, and the system should be rehabilitating. And I believe that those who find themselves needing to be in solitary confinement, as I said in my statement, there may be reasons for having separation, but not for 23 out of 24 hours a day, not for decades on time. Some of the witnesses who spoke up and testified on this bill made it very clear they would have rather been beaten than to be put in solitary confinement. The mental torture that puts on an individual, it's hard to rebound from. And I salute all of those who have come forward with their testimony to be able to show that there was an opportunity to become an advocate for change. And so with their input, with their real-life story, to be able to document for us to appreciate and then to be able to find our vote for a bill like this is to recognize that change is necessary. And as I said early on, I appreciate the administration's effort, and they're working collaboratively with us on this. And I appreciate my colleagues' support, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
The clerk will open the roll. All those vote who desire to vote. All those vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 54, noes 13. Bill is passed.